Looking around, I noticed old ritual objects and skeletons lying in the chamber. The skeletons looked ancient, but they emitted an eerie aura. I suddenly realized these skeletons were likely the remains of people lured into the cave by the ghost. Overcome with nausea and fear, I turned to flee. But just then, I heard footsteps behind me. Terrified, I turned to see a blurry figure approaching. I ran for my life, the scary footsteps getting closer and closer. I felt something grab my clothes, and with a desperate effort, I broke free and escaped the cave. Leaning against my door at home, panting and gasping for air, I knew I had barely escaped. As days passed, my fear of the reservoir didn't diminish. It only grew stronger. One night, as I lay in bed, tossing and turning, unable to sleep, moonlight streamed in through the window, casting eerie shadows on the floor. I closed my eyes, trying to calm my nerves, but I couldn't help but think of the vague figure in the cave. Suddenly, a soft noise broke the night's silence. It was a deep, strange sound, as if it came from far away or right next to my ear. I opened my eyes wide, only to see the room bathed in moonlight, nothing out of place. However, the sound grew clearer, as if something was approaching. I held my breath, my heart racing. Suddenly, a white shadow flashed in front of the window. It passed quickly, like a bolt of lightning, disappearing into the darkness. I sat up in fear, looked around, but found nothing. I thought I was seeing things or hallucinating. But then the white shadow reappeared, this time in the corner of the room. I dared to come closer and saw a blurred figure in white, standing still, with empty eyes devoid of life. I trembled with fear and tried to scream, but no sound came out. I turned to run, but my legs felt as heavy as lead. I knew I couldn't escape this time. Just then, the figure dressed in white moved, slowly approaching me, as if stepping on my heart. I closed my eyes tightly, too terrified to look at its face, but the white figure stopped in front of me. Summoning every ounce of courage, I opened my eyes and saw it standing there silently, its eyes still empty. I felt a strong coldness rising from deep within, as if bound by an invisible force. I knew I couldn't just sit there waiting. Taking a deep breath, I reached out to touch the figure, but my hand passed through its body as if it were just a phantom. Shocked, I pulled my hand back, only to see the white figure move again. It turned toward the door and disappeared into the darkness. I stood frozen, unable to comprehend what had happened. After that, I never saw the white figure again. As days passed, I tried to bury myself in my busy life, hoping to forget those terrifying experiences. But whenever it was quiet at night, the strange voice and the white figure would always haunt my thoughts, making it impossible to rest in peace. One afternoon, I was walking alone in the village. The sun shone brightly on the country road, and everything seemed so peaceful and beautiful. But when I accidentally walked near the reservoir, a strong sense of unease gripped my heart. I stopped and looked at the reservoir from a distance, seeing the water as calm as a mirror, as if all fears had been dispelled by the warmth of the sun. Yet a chill rose from the bottom of my heart, as if something was watching me from beneath the water. I hesitated for a moment, but finally decided to get closer. I walked carefully along the edge of the reservoir, trying not to make any noise. Suddenly, I saw a blurry figure emerge from the water, lying motionless on the surface, as if lifeless. Frightened, I took a few steps back, but when I looked again, the figure was gone. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I had imagined it, but when I looked closer, I realized there was indeed something floating on the water. Summoning all my courage, I approached and saw a white robe floating on the water. It was gently swaying, as if something was trying to break free. I looked closely and saw a pale hand beneath the robe, hanging weakly under the water, as if calling for help. Terrified, I took several steps back, but at that moment I realized a terrible fact. The white robe and pale hand were the same as the white figure I had seen before. Panicking, I turned and ran, not daring to look back. After that, I never went near the reservoir again. Every night I closed all doors and windows tightly, terrified that those horrible things will return to haunt me. My hometown is located in the rolling hills of Springfield, where there is a reservoir that serves as an important source of water for the villagers to use in their daily lives and to irrigate the farms. The reservoir is surrounded by green trees, and the water is as calm as a mirror. Every time I go back to Springfield, I find an opportunity to go to the edge of the reservoir to walk and enjoy the tranquility and beauty. When I was a child, I would often be idle with some playmates in the village, and the reservoir was our paradise. We caught fish, played with shrimp, and competed to see who could throw stones the farthest. At that time, we naively thought that the reservoir was just an ordinary place, no different from other ponds and rivers. However, there was one experience that made me deeply afraid of the reservoir. It was a sunny afternoon, and some playmates and I went to the reservoir again. As usual, we played on the shore and then started throwing rocks into the water. I picked up a flat stone and threw it into the water. It skipped several times before sinking with a thud. My friends praised me for throwing it far, and I felt happy too. Suddenly, I noticed a dark shadow flashing on the hill opposite the reservoir. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I was mistaken, but when I looked again, the shadow was still there. "Look, what's that?" I pointed to the opposite hill and said to my friends. They looked in the direction I was pointing, and they all saw the dark shadow. Some said it was a bobcat, some said it was a wild dog, and others thought it was a passerby. "Let's go and check it out," suggested one of the boldest boys, Michael. "Sure, there's nothing to be afraid of," agreed another friend, Sarah. So driven by curiosity, we walked to the opposite hill. The path was rough, but we walked happily, pushing aside the weeds from time to time to look for traces of the shadow. After about 10 minutes of walking, we finally reached the top of the hill, but when we looked around, the shadow had disappeared. We were disappointed but had no choice but to go back the way we came. On the way back, we talked about what the shadow could have been. Some thought it might be a wild animal hiding in the hills, while others speculated it could have been a person who hid when they saw us coming. "Do you think there's something strange around the reservoir?" One of my friends, Emily, suddenly asked, sending a shiver down our spines. We looked at each other, but no one said anything. After that, every time I went to play by the reservoir, I couldn't help but think of that shadow, and I always felt a little uneasy. As time went by, I grew up and left Springfield to study in the city. However, that strange reservoir always remained in my memory, reminding me from time to time that some places are not as simple as they seem. It wasn't until later, when I heard more strange stories about the reservoir from the villagers, that I realized that the shadow was only the tip of the iceberg of strange events at the reservoir. I remembered one evening